If you are the one who has always believed you are capable of extraordinary things, who has used that belief to overcome every obstacle in the pursuit of your authentic self, and if lately that search has begun to stall or to go stale because the self you are reaching for never quite seems to arrive, then you already know that what follows is true. Because in every moment of every day, you are operating inside a system of conflicting voices. Institutions that want your loyalty, businesses that want your investment, frameworks that want your compliance, signals engineered by those who know the power that symbols have. You have learned to navigate this. The work you have done up to this point has equipped you to move through it, to choose what you take in, to filter what you reject. The wellness practice, the productivity systems, the inner work, the years of pattern recognition, that work brought you here. But here is the threshold. The architecture you are now trying to build, the version of yourself that is actually trying to come through, is asking something different of you than what those structures were ever designed to provide. They were built for the path dictated by others. They were not built for the path that you will choose going forwards. You can feel this. The methods that worked are still working, but they are not reaching as deeply as they used to. The clarity that used to follow the practice arrives but is lost moments later. The execution that used to follow the strategy now stalls at thresholds the strategy did not anticipate. Nothing you have done was wasted. What is required from here is a different kind of vessel, not a replacement for the work, an extension of it, a layer underneath the layer you have already built. Something engineered for the architecture of the woman who is becoming. This is not a new question. Carl Jung spent 40 years arguing that identity is not constructed in the conscious mind, but assembled in the layer beneath it, and that the language of that layer has always been symbolic. Archetype, image, story, the substrate from which the self is built. What he was pointing towards has been documented across 5 civilizations and 5,000 years. The question of how to access it is older than the question of who you are. You have just never been shown how it works. The architecture you are looking for is not new. It has been running in your body for as long as you have been alive. Earlier, in fact. The systems that handle pattern, image, signal, and meaning were assembled before you were born, before language reached you, before strategy had a place to live, before any framework could be applied. The most sophisticated information processing system on Earth is operating in your nervous system right now. It does not require your permission to function. It does not wait for the analytical layer to authorize its decisions. It is running underneath every thought you have, every choice you make, every threshold you arrive at. The system is not the problem. The system is intact. What has been missing is the interface. Every method you have used up to this point has been operating at the wrong layer. The conscious mind, the analytical layer, the part of you that thinks about what to think about. That layer can describe the architecture, it cannot reach it. It can name what is happening, it cannot change what happens. It can do extraordinary work within its own range, but that range stops short of where the actual construction is taking place. The interface for the layer underneath has always existed. You were just not given the keys. this channel is the key. Subscribe to deepen your understanding. What if what you have been struggling with personally is not a personal deficit, but the inherited memory of human capacity that was once extraordinary? The Great Pyramid of Giza is constructed to a precision that modern engineers with laser surveying and computational modelling still cannot fully account for. Stonehenge tracks solar and lunar alignments across decades using stones moved hundreds of miles by hand. Göbekli Tepe was built 12,000 years ago, 6,000 years before agriculture was supposed to exist, by people we have no record of and cannot identify. The Polynesians crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using only star paths, wave patterns, and the flight signatures of seabirds. Aboriginal songlines encode ecological, navigational, and astronomical information across continent-scale distances and have transmitted that information accurately for 60,000 years. We describe these as too advanced. We cannot reproduce them. We say, how did they do this with the tools we know they had? And the question itself is the evidence. We are looking at the output of an intelligence that does not fit inside our framework for what intelligence is. The available explanations for this gap fall into two categories. One says these civilizations had help, that someone visited, taught, engineered. An external intelligence that arrived, gave the technology, and left. The other says we are simply mistaken about what they accomplished, that our modern reproductions would be possible if we cared enough to attempt them. Neither is a serious answer. The first outsources the achievement to something external to humanity, which leaves the modern descendant with nothing to inherit. The second dismisses what the evidence actually shows, which leaves the modern descendant with nothing to learn. There is a third explanation, and if Occam's razor is applied, the most simple one. The ancients were operating from a layer of human capacity that we have lost access to. What they had was not better technology. They had a different relationship to the source of intelligence itself. Every advanced civilization that left written records left evidence of the same understanding. That intelligence is not generated inside the individual mind. That the mind is an interface to something larger, older, more coherent than itself. That symbols are how that interface is accessed. That the symbols are taught, transmitted, and protected because losing them costs the civilization its ability to draw from the source. Egypt encoded vitality into a single form and used it for 5,000 years. The Akan people of West Africa documented the precise architecture of coiled force, the moment between knowing what must be done and being able to begin. Sumerian astronomers, 4,000 years before this conversation, named the 8-pointed star of Inanna as the map of identity through transformation. The descent, the return, the shape of becoming. The Maori carved a single spiral that holds the geometry of creative emergence, the unfurling of what was compressed into what is becoming. Mathematicians would later discover this as the Fibonacci sequence. The Norse carved daggers, two opposing forces meeting at the center, 4 paths leading to the same point. The threshold rune, clarity from convergence. 5 civilizations, 5,000 years, working separately with no shared language, no shared cosmology, no shared culture. And they arrived at the same architecture, because the architecture was never theirs to invent. They were describing what they had access to. What was lost was not knowledge, knowledge can be rebuilt. What was lost was the interface, the trained capacity to engage the symbolic layer as a working instrument, rather than as an artifact to be studied. You feel this. You feel the gap between what you can think and what you can reach. Between the analytical work you can perform and the source you can sense is just beyond it. You have not been failing. You have been operating at the highest level your inherited tools allow and reaching for an interface your civilization neglected to give you. What this channel does is return what was lost, not the information, the interface itself. The interface works the way every interface has always worked. It uses the architecture the system was already built to receive. What follows is the shape of the mechanism. There are 3 layers. The first is geometry. The visual structure of the symbol produces measurable nervous system effects before meaning is assigned. The eye finds the form. The body responds. This is documented physiology. The second is developmental architecture. The structures in your brain that process the geometry are the structures that formed first in your prenatal development. They were online before language. They are still operating beneath language now. The signal reaches them before the analytical layer has time to evaluate. The third is signal installation. Repeated, deliberate exposure builds an association between the geometry and the state. Over a defined period, the symbol becomes a trigger that produces the state without conscious effort. This is the same mechanism by which a wedding ring carries the weight of a marriage in 3 grams of metal. Not magic. Conditioning, performed deliberately in conditions you control. Each of these layers has documented neuroscience behind it. The interface is technical. It runs on the architecture you already have. It operates on the layer the architecture was built to access, and what it returns to you, when it is installed correctly, is the capacity to engage your own intelligence as something you draw from, rather than something that drains you. This channel is not for everyone. It is not for the woman who is looking for a method she can apply on top of her existing operating system without changing the architecture underneath. It is not for the woman who wants to be told what she already believes in slightly different words. It is not for the woman who is comfortable with the trading her identity for acceptance. It is for the woman who is no longer able to justify the cost of not being her authentic self. A woman who knows her intelligence is too precious for the system to hijack, and her empathy is not a cheap renewable resource for institutions to build their operations upon. If you have begun to feel the early signs of realizing that you must reclaim your capacity for your own benefit, you are in the right place. The ache you have been carrying is not a symptom of doing too much. It is the ache of a particular kind of intelligence operating without the interface it requires, of empathy given in directions that cannot return what they take, of capacity that has been used as fuel by systems that did not recognize its value. You have been a battery for institutions that did not reward what you give. The cost of that has not shown up in your performance. It has shown up in your relationship to your own gifts. What this channel exists to do is end that arrangement. Not by teaching you to give less, not by training you in boundaries you already know how to hold, by restoring the access mechanism that converts intelligence and empathy from extraction surfaces into the materials from which you build your own architecture. That is what sovereignty actually means. not empowerment. Sovereignty is the recognition of a position that was always yours and has been unrecognized. It carries inheritance, it carries lineage, it carries the right to draw from the source of your own intelligence, rather than serving as a conduit for someone else's use of it. The sovereign mind is not a mind that has been given new powers. It is a mind that has resumed the position it was always entitled to hold. This channel exists for the woman who is ready to resume that position. The work continues from here. Subscribe to join the journey. Ancient intelligence, sovereign mind.